Welcome everyone back to weekly weather updates, and in today's video we're going to have a look at the latest from the live radar, run through the UKV, have a look at the precipitation and the temperature over the next 5 days. And this is widely pretty dry throughout the rest of this working week, and it is pretty cold as well. We saw extremely cold conditions overnight last night with inversion taking place in central, eastern and southern areas, some areas dropping down to as low as minus 10 degrees, and multiple stations recording coldest temperatures for many years in January. So yeah, a really cold night last night, even with pretty mild upper air temperatures, and it just shows you what a cold air inversion can do this time of year. And that cold air towards the surface is going to linger throughout most of this week. We will see a bit of mixing towards the end of the week into the weekend, with actually colder upper air temperatures coming, but at the surface it actually might get slightly milder, but we're not expecting anything particularly mild throughout the next sort of 5 to 7 days. So we'll run through the UKV, as I said, looking at that, and then we'll look at the GFS, GM, ECWF and the ensembles, as it's pretty blocked at the moment, with high pressure sat over the top of us with very little movement of air. But as we head towards the weekend and start of next week, it's looking likely though that westerly winds will break through the higher pressure system, and we're going to be seeing more mobile weather patterns. Again, exactly what those entail, still there's quite a bit of uncertainty. The GM, ECWF are sort of high pressure ridges we're trying to build in, giving us briefly colder periods, but also milder, wetter periods as well, sort of oscillating between colder and drier and milder and wetter. Whereas the GFS, like it did yesterday, produces really stormy conditions, dropping the tropospheric polar vortex down into the North Atlantic, piling into the UK, and that would be very, very unsettled and probably quite chilly as well. So we'll run through what they're showing in the second half of the video. So do remember, if you enjoy my videos, make sure you like and subscribe, and remember to follow me on Twitter as well. The link's in the description. So you can see at the moment it is very dry on the live radar, a few showers in far western areas, but it's really little precipitation there at all, and most areas do have some nice bright conditions, some lingering cloud, especially in the north and the west where we've had decaying weather fronts, but a lot of areas the further southwards and eastwards you go towards the centre of the high, clearer skies are there. But it is, as I said, very cold. Now, if you put on the temperatures, that's around 2 p.m, you'd expect this to be sort of peak temperatures of the day, and you can see that the temperatures really are not particularly mild at the moment. In the north and west, you can see more yellows, again indicating temperatures around that sort of 9 or 10 degree mark. However, the further southwards and eastwards you go, more blues and even some lighter blues mixing in the far southeast. As I said, a complete reversal to what we had last week, where it was cold in the southeast, but it was colder further northwards and westwards. And in these areas, we've got these lighter blues to the south of London, up into East Anglia, parts of southern and western England, you can see that temperatures really hovering just a few degrees above freezing, and they will plummet away again tonight. You can see that temperature contrast again, just because the high pressure is sat over this southeast corner, it is remaining really quite cold, and feeling quite nippy as well. The further northwards and westwards you go, it is still relatively dry, a bit more cloud, but pretty mild, slightly above average for this time of year, especially for those northern areas in Scotland. So yeah, not too bad. I guess a lot of people probably enjoying that in the north, where we've had a lot of cold and snowy weather recently. Now, if you look at the UKV and have a look at what the precipitation and the temperature is doing over the course of the next 5 days, now you can see at the moment we've got a bit of thicker cloud in the north and the west, a few showers, but it is decaying away, and some brighter spells further southwards and eastwards. Overnight tonight, where we have that slither of clear skies through East Anglia, the Midlands and southwest England, that's where the coldest temperatures will actually be tonight. The far southeast, which saw very cold temperatures last night, down sort of -8, -9, -10 in a few places, will actually be probably hovering just around freezing tonight because of that cloud not allowing that radiative cooling. And as we head into Tuesday, again, clearer skies for many central and southern areas, a few clouds here or there, and a bit of patchy rain in the north and west, but generally another relatively dry day. And probably quite cold as well, as we'll see in the temperatures in a minute. Beyond that, as we head into Wednesday, you can see a bit of a weather front sinking in from the north, and that is associated with a bit of a change in air mass pushing in, actually a colder air mass, but that mixing of air will actually turn it slightly milder in the south and east, probably just really to around average for the time of year. As you can see, that rain band will move through, so Wednesday during the afternoon it might be a little bit soggy in central, southern and eastern areas, but again the weather front doesn't look particularly strong, so maybe just some light drizzly rain there. A few wintry showers through Scotland, but again nothing too crazy, and that cold air mass will spread through and give widely a chilly night, but not quite as cold as last night was or the next few nights will be. Through Thursday, a dry day, relatively fresh conditions out there, and you can see into the evening again, probably a hard frost in places. As we head into the weekend though, more mobile patterns setting up. Again, more weather fronts trying to push in, but not having too much success and just a bit of thick cloud at this stage. So we'll just have to see how it does develop, but it definitely does look like it's going to be turning more unsettled next week, but probably initially only in the north and the west, then perhaps becoming more widespread. There is, though, still a lot of spread between the models, exactly how it does evolve, the air masses associated with it, and how unsettled it does get. Now look at the upper air temperatures. You can see in the south and the east at the moment it's not particularly cold, even though the surface temperatures are resemblant of a much colder air mass. An air mass maybe 10 degrees colder than it is right now. Even milder air mass is spreading over the coming days, and it doesn't change too much conditions at the surface. It's really the cloud amounts that change the temperatures. So generally sort of average, maybe even slightly above average air mass at 850 HPA does prevail, but at the surface still seeing an inversion. However, you can see later in the week, towards Wednesday into Thursday time, we see that cold air mass spread through for all, and it's around 5 degrees colder at 850 HPA. But because, as I said, it mixes that air at the surface, it doesn't really change the temperatures all too much, maybe taking them slightly higher in a few spots. As we head into the weekend, we stay relatively cool, a brief milder wedge comes in, and then another cooler air mass comes in from the north. So we're generally staying around average, if not below average, for the temperatures in many areas, and we'll have a look at those now. So you can see, if we look through earlier this morning, you can see widely around that -5 or lower again. This is high resolution, but not quite as high resolution to get those exact pinpoint max temperatures in localised areas, where it did get down to sort of -8 to -10, but widely a bitterly cold night in southern and eastern areas last night. And you can see this afternoon temperatures hardly getting much above 3 to 5 degrees, and through the areas in Kent and Sussex, maybe 1 or 2, really chilly. Through tonight, those temperatures will be widely bitterly cold once again, but it's in that slither where we have clearer skies through the East Midlands, East Anglia, down through central England into the southwest and southern Wales, the far southeast, where we saw some very cold temperatures last night, maybe hovering around 2 to 4 degrees because of cloud. As we head into Tuesday afternoon, you can see temperatures once again struggling to get much above 2 to 5 degrees in many areas, but 9 or 10 further northwards and westwards. Tuesday night into Wednesday, again another bitterly cold night through that slither where we have clear skies, again -4, -5, or even lower in a few spots, and through into Wednesday afternoon. Temperatures once again maybe 4 to 6 degrees, but that colder air mass is pushing into the north, so Scotland is now starting to turn a lot colder. Overnight into Thursday, quite widely cold, but not quite as bitterly cold in those areas in the south and east, more just generally around freezing. And then into Thursday afternoon, again widely around 5 to 7 degrees. So yes, a colder air mass comes in, but it actually increases the temperatures a little bit in the far south and east by a sort of a degree or two. So it just shows you how very little microclimate conditions, small little things like an inversion, can make drastic differences, and that's why it is important looking at the 850 HPA temperatures, but they can sometimes in this sort of situation be deceiving. Now through Thursday night into Friday, again another cold night, especially in northern and western areas down below freezing, and into Friday again chilly 5 to 7 degrees, and that continues into Saturday where actually the frost will be further southwards with some thicker cloud pushing in northern areas. So if we do now go over to look at the longer range, look at the GFS, GM, ECMWF and the ensembles, you can see the high pressure in control at the moment, briefly colder air mass pushing through later this week before the high pressure topples back in. And then we could see a briefly colder air mass once again pushing for Saturday, but not quite as inviting here from the GFS for that. And then eventually we see another quite cold northerly wind push in for next Monday. Very interesting there, but it does topple quite quickly. And then we see a big Atlantic onslaught with big low pressure systems moving in extremely stormy conditions. And if the upper air temperatures, it is relatively cool as well. So it's quite cold and very stormy. Again, it's in the extended range, so things can change, but this run, it's keeping us relatively cold around the -5 isotherm a lot of the time. So wintry opportunities in the north, but there will always be a mild sector sweeping in sort of the imminent future. So not expecting a prolonged cold spell by any means, but relatively cool and could be turning extremely unsettled in the longer term. If you look at the GM, see how that does compare. High pressure over the top of us at the moment. Northerly wind later this week. Could see a brief cold air mass once again into the weekend. And then we'll try and pull in a northerly for next Monday, but nowhere near as sharp with that ridge. Some more just a northwesterly flow, nothing particularly cold. And then we could go very unsettled at day 10. But the GM has high pressure shifted further northwards. What this does is it keeps us milder in the upper air temperatures and also drier as well. And we could even see another inversion under that as well in the far south, with the north being quite mobile with weather fronts pushing through. So we'll have to see how that does develop again. If the high pressure just shifts a few hundred miles further southwards, we will be going a lot more unsettled. But in this pattern, we'd be on the cusp of going unsettled, but this little ridge building over top of us, just keeping us dry for the meantime into the start of February. If you compare it to the ECMWF, again, high pressure in control at the moment, brief northerly wind later this week. Could see a slightly cooler air mass pushing through Saturday again. You can see that here. Cold air spreading through temporarily. And then we see a westerly conditions prevail. But we could see a brief northerly there for next Monday before eventually, again, going quite westerly. But ridge building in again and actually extending further northwards, trying to pull more of a northerly flow in. Again, not ridiculously cold because those isopiles are not particularly tight together and not directly linked to the arc. So you have to see a much bigger high pressure feature to get that to happen. But interesting nonetheless, would still be keeping us relatively cool and potentially turning us a lot more unsettled in the north. But it all depends on what happens to this ridge of high pressure. It's the same high pressure we have over at top of us at the moment. It just keeps trying to hold on. It loses a lot of influence in around a week's time, but it continues to try and hold on. And we'll have to see how much it does hold on, whether it stays over the top of us, sinks to our south, or even try and spread further northwards, trying to bring in some very cold air. Some ensemble members have that pattern, but only a few. So it is quite a big outlier runs at this stage, but it is a possibility as well. We'll just have to see where this high pressure goes and how it does interact with a very strong jet stream and very cold air spilling out of northeast Canada, which looks quite likely in around 7 to 10 days' time. Now, if you look at the ensembles, you can see relatively mild at the moment in London, but actually towards the surface, as we've seen, it is very cold. And in the longer term, we're generally average to below average in terms of upper air temperatures as well. Relatively dry towards the end of January, could be a few showers and weather fronts, or decaying weather fronts moving through at times. And then it becomes slightly more unsettled into early February, the first week of February. But there's no huge precipitation spikes and not loads of frequency, considering we've got over the 30 ensemble members here. So definitely some still keeping that high pressure theme, but majority are still keeping us average to below average in terms of upper air temperatures. You can see those that go down to the -10 or lower, those are the ones pulling in easterly winds with a bit of a blocking feature further northwards, that high pressure migrating northwards, but we haven't really seen that in the majority of runs, so I wouldn't put too much weight into that as of yet. Again, look at the sea level pressure. You can see still big spreads, some keeping us very high pressure, others going very stormy in the longer term. Even the GFS run there, which does go very stormy, the actual centre of the lows stay further northwards, so we only actually get down to 1,000 millibars in the south, even though it would be very unsettled. So we'll have to see what happens with that. Even better is to have a look at Glasgow. You can see much lower trends there in the longer term, 950, 960, or maybe 5 or 6 ensemble members, just showing you how unsettled it could be. But there's huge spread here. If you look at the ECMWF ensemble members for the 850 HPA temperatures, again, generally above average at the moment, and then around or below average for the foreseeable future, but slightly more smaller periods going just above average there. High precipitation in the longer term, but again, for 50 ensemble members, it's not huge amounts, no huge unsettled signal, but definitely a signal for more unsettled conditions within some of the ensemble members, but we will just have to see. For the time being, though, it is staying cold, it's staying quite seasonable, frosty, foggy, and relatively dry, which is one good thing I think most people will agree with. No sign of any major snow or anything like that, but it could be turning a lot more unsettled into February. But as I said, for the time being, it's cold, dry, and frosty. Complete contrast to the first half of the month, which was wet, mild, and just generally very, very unsettled indeed. So we'll have to see what happens. Still, everything's on the cards for the start of February. Mild, wet and windy weather, dry, frosty weather, or even potential for a bit of cold and snowy weather within some of these runs. We'll just have to see what happens. But GFS definitely going for that very stormy pattern towards the start of February, and we'll have to see if more Ensemble members and more operational runs as it gets into the 10-day time frame do pick up on that pattern, or if they do try and keep that high pressure around. So anyway, thanks for watching, hope you enjoyed, subscribe if you're new, and I'll see you again for another video soon.